This is More to Say with Randy Naughton. Interesting conversations with interesting people. We welcome you back to another edition of More to Say with Randy Naughton. It's my podcast, and I want to have interesting conversations with interesting people. I thank you all for listening, following, liking, subscribing, following me all over social media. If you haven't done so yet, please do so. In episodes past, we've kind of kept it lighthearted, and we've sort of kind of goofed a little bit and had fun and laughed and things like that. Today, we're going to talk about something a little more serious, and some may even say a little more somber. We're going to talk about death and people who call themselves death doulas or end-of-life advocates or specialists or whatever you want to call them. Say hello to Joan Bretthauer. She is a certified end-of-life doula, and she is with the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance. Welcome in, Joan. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing this conversation to the forefront.
You know, and Joan, it's a conversation people don't want to have. Death is not an easy thing to talk about. But what an end-of-life specialist does, and I just learned about this, and honestly, I was fascinated by it. We understand a doula is somebody who helps babies come into this world and help moms through the process. It's not medical, none of that. But then I recently learned of end-of-life doulas as well. Describe what that is, Joan. What do you do?
Well, just like you described a birthing doula, it's really the same at end of life, except the person is transitioning somewhere else, not here on earth. So the end-of-life doula is non-medical, holistic. As I have learned in my training, there is nothing medical about dying. It really is a spiritual event, and it's a very humbling event to be a part of with another human being.
And you help those who are dying and those who are dying's family, friends, colleagues. You kind of help everybody deal with this. Why is this such a hard thing for us to deal with? Because let's be honest, death is life.
Death is a conversation that we really never have or have had. But as you look at what's going on now, there are probably in about the last 5 years, I've noticed a growth of end-of-life doulas. I've also noticed physicians writing books about end-of-life care, nurses writing books about end-of-life care, nurses on TikTok talking about end-of-life care, hospice, palliative care, that kind of stuff. So I think that the more that we talk about end of life, I think personally, the better we will have our end of life will be. It's really all about the conversations. We create weddings. You know, we plan for weddings, we plan for babies, we plan for graduations. Yeah. Don't plan for our end of life or our death.
Well, I mean, there are the things where people buy their funerals in advance and things like that. Right. And they have a will or an estate and they put things on paper, but it's the actual physical passing of the person that you help everybody deal with.
And the planning of all of that.
Oh.
Because, okay, so let's say, so when people hire me, they are usually familiar with what end-of-life doulas do, or they've heard of end-of-life doulas, or they heard a story, whatever. But they want you to come in and help them plan for their end of life, meaning their vigil. A vigil is when a person is actively dying. What kind of environment do you want? Do you want a loud environment? Do you want a soft environment? Meaning, do you want soft music playing? Do you want friends playing on TV? It all is personalized to what you as an individual wants. It's not about what your loved ones want. It's not about what your family wants, but it is about you and what you want at that time.
Well, we know that there are, well, I do want to back up this. The National End of Doula Alliance is relatively new. That particular
Yes,
alliance only started in 2018, and now there are about 6,500 end of life doulas in the US right now. So are people catching on to this conversation?
very much.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And you know, the interest, not interest, for me, it's not interesting because I've been a hospice volunteer for a long time. But especially nurses and physicians, they want to really accompany the person at end of life. But because there are medical guidelines, Medicare guidelines for hospice, the physician or the nurse, their visits are an hour, maybe a week, and maybe a couple times a week. But when you're an end of life doula, you are there for however long your patient wants you there.
You mentioned hospice a couple of times.
Uh-huh.
Can you clarify the difference between hospice and doulas?
Very good. That is a question that I get asked quite a bit. And so hospice is a program. You can have it in your home. You actually have it wherever you live, wherever you call home. You could be in a nursing home, you could be in an assisted living, you could be in an independent living, or you could be in your own physical home or living with one of your kids. But anyway, so hospice comes to you and provides certain things for you that are paid by Medicare or private insurance, depending on your age. Hospice is guided by Medicare guidelines.
And
So,
that's
and
all
then
the medical stuff.
that is correct, right?
Yeah.
So your pain meds and your baths and stuff like that. So for the end of life doula, the end of life doula is private pay. So that means out of their pocket. It's not
Gotcha.
paid by insurance, not paid by Medicare, anything like that. So being an end of life doula, being paid is private paid. The end of life doula actually complements hospice in the way that the end of life doula can spend as much time with that client as that client wants.
Uh-huh.
So it's not like we're Medicare is dictating to the end of life doula how much time you can spend with the client. All the
Right.
paperwork that you have to fill out for Medicare. End of life doulas don't have to do that because they're not paying us.
I understand. Okay, so that was going to be one of my questions. Does insurance cover it? And you answered that. Now, obviously, if there's a car accident or something tragic happens and there is a sudden death, are the circumstances different with the family?
Well,
For you, I mean.
well, I don't know if a family could, if they lost someone suddenly and they haven't done any kind of preparation or
Right.
anything. Yes, they could actually call an end of life doula and say, I need to plan a memorial. I need to, whatever it is they need to do. Then yes, the end of life doula can help them. Now, just so you know, each end of life doula is different. There
Mm-hmm.
are some services that we provide that overlap. There are some doulas that actually they're actually an end of life doula from the time the person dies forward, meaning they will help family members with doing a lot of paperwork,
Right.
notifying your employer, just doing all that kind of stuff, insurance, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the shock of it, of course, would some people may not be in the right mind to do
Right.
it. Now, I recently spoke on our podcast with somebody who has just had their hand in every cookie jar when it came to weddings, from planning to catering to you name it. And she emphasized how different weddings are. And now end of life is now becoming kind of like that too. And it
It
brings me to the subject called a legacy project. What does that mean when it comes to end of life?
Well, this type of legacy project is not a financial type legacy leaving your family. And research has shown that legacy work, life reviews, a life review would be legacy work. It shows I say the magic that doing legacy work with your client can provide, especially if the client has unfinished business with family members or friends,
Mhm.
because when you start doing the legacy work, it uncovers different things and it helps people realize what kind of life that they did have. Sometimes when you ask someone, well, what did your life consist of? They would say, well, not much. But when you really start having those conversations, you uncover some really wonderful stuff that I think usually is a big deal.
And that
So
is stuff like you peel back the onion of their life and realize, oh, you did this and you did that. And that's part of your legacy.
correct, correct. And then you can create a book or you
Video,
can create
maybe.
a photo book with it or a written book, or there's just so many different projects that you can do with someone
Now
in the realm of legacy.
you mentioned that you were a hospice volunteer, and you've seen, obviously a lot of death. How do you handle it personally? How does somebody who is an end of life doula handle it psychologically? Because that's, it's hard for some people to even talk to, let alone be a part of it every day.
Right. For me, I have never been afraid of death. And for me, it's always been an honor to be with someone at end of life. And so I do a lot of self-care. Actually, I live self-care, meaning because someone is died. I mean, I do have rituals for when I'm with someone and they die. But beyond that, my life is self-care pretty much all the time. Meaning I do meditation. I have friends who are also end of life doulas on an international scope. Um, the massage, that type of stuff.
Right.
But I mean, a stress-free life. So for me, it's that's what self-care is for me.
You mentioned it's an honor, but is there a particular passing that really sticks with you? Obviously, no names or medical
Right.
circumstances, but is there a particular passing of a particular person that really sticks with you and why?
Well, um, I have not really seen anything horrific. The deaths that I have personally been involved with have been very peaceful. So that means that some of them were getting pain under control at end of life. Sometimes that can be a challenge, that can be hard, and it's hard for the family. But really, other than trying to get pain under control, I have not witnessed a horrible death. I've been very lucky. Now, one
Yeah.
thing you want to know about me is that I only take on 2 clients at a time. And the reason I only take on 2 at a time, it depends on where they are in the process. I've had one young lady now for a couple years because she has the fear of death, and we only meet periodically. But normally, if it's a person who has 3 months or less, I only take on 2 because I really want to focus on them individually. And you never know when you're going to get a call.
Right.
You never know when they're going to text you. And for me, even though end of life doulas, we offer emotional support, personalized care, advocacy, and all that. For me, it's about being present, holding space. Because if you want to connect with your client, for me, that's where I have to come from. And sometimes it takes a little while to
Mhm.
connect with someone for whatever reason.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the young lady who was afraid of death, and you said you've been speaking with her on and off. Is her fear diminished since she's been visiting with you? Do you see it?
Um, I can tell that it has diminished some. She has had this fear for a very long time.
Yeah.
And the fear for her started with when she was 6 years old or 9 years old, the kidnapping of Polly Klaas out in
Oh,
California.
yeah.
So, yeah, that's what triggered for this young lady her fear of death. And she's been working on it for a long time.
Interesting. Now let's
And
talk about, and I know that you mainly focus on the person who is in the process of dying, but you also help family members.
right,
So, family
right,
members,
right.
colleagues, I want to know what their thoughts are and what feedback you've received after their loved one has passed.
They are always thankful for the doula being there. Always, always, always. Because it takes, the thing is that the doula is the professional. If it's your spouse that is dying or your child that is dying, you want to be there. If it's your child, you want to be there as their parent.
Right.
Not as someone that has to figure the whole process out. So for them, it's a relief. They have this extra person that they can call anytime. And the goal of the end of life doula is to educate the family on how for them to take the best care of their loved one. So it's a stress reliever, a huge stress reliever for the family to have the extra support of an end of life doula.
And does your work continue once the person has passed? Does it continue with the family? Because the grief doesn't go away, obviously.
Right, right. I don't do grief. I do know people that do grief, professionals, but I certainly can have conversations. So for
Right.
me, it depends on the person, the patient who died, their family. Sometimes people still consult with me a couple months after the death. And I still talk to one lady periodically on the anniversary of her mother's death and also on her mother's birthday. I always send her pictures of her mother because I probably have about 500 that I had taken when we were together, and we were together for a couple years.
So that's really nice that you are sending photos and keeping that connection together with these people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes,
And
yes.
do they seem to appreciate that?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes the response will be, it's so hard for me that mother died so many years ago. So there's we always carry the grief. I mean, um, life is different after your loved one dies.
Right.
It'll never be like it was before they died. So um, grief can be a challenge, yes.
Wow. And you think about it, we're all so different, but that is indeed the thing we all have in common. We're all going to die, whether,
Yes,
whether
yes,
we become ill, old age, natural causes, sudden
yes,
death, an accident, whatever, we're all going there. So when I say death is life, that kind of sums it up. Um, but you look at like in Europe and traditional, I guess, old traditions, they already have things like this in place for centuries for honoring those who are in the process of passing. Is that kind of what you're doing now?
yes, yes, yes. And planning is so important. Just like you were talking about the young lady you interviewed about the weddings,
Yeah.
that is exactly, you can map that on for end of life doulas, and that is how it is for us too. Nobody wants the same ritual or end of life. Everybody's is unique to them. So
Yeah.
no two deaths are alike. Could be similar, but not alike.
When you are done, when you are finished with a particular client and they have passed and your work is done for this particular person, um, how do you feel when you get home?
Sad because I've just lost some. It's sad for me too, just like
Yeah.
it is for the family for losing a loved one, especially if it was someone you connected with. Because sometimes you will connect deeply with people. And that is because of being present to them. Because it's not about the doula, it's about the one you're caring for.
Wow, that's
So
interesting.
holding space and being present is so important in
So if
this.
if there's somebody watching our conversation or listening to our conversation right now, and they think that their loved one or they may benefit from what you offer as far as an end of life doula, what is the process? How do they do that?
Well, they Google end of life doula St. Louis and they'll find a list of end of life doulas. So I have been a part of an organization in St. Louis called Gateway End of Life Coalition. It's been around a very long time. It was actually created as a result of Bill Moyers years ago doing his special called On Your Own Terms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was like in the 80s or 90s. So it's been around a while. Okay, so anyway, so I was on the board of Gateway for about 10 years, and I'm the past president. I decided to step down as president so I could start an end-of-life doula group in St. Louis because end-of-life doulas are not licensed. So we have to make sure that our standards, our quality, our ethics are up there. Being on the board of Gateway, I had worked with hospice and palliative care physician, nurses, social workers, and I know what they expect. So I started the Midwest End of Life Doula Collective group here in St. Louis. So if you go to gatewayeol.org, they have a tab on their website called End of Life Doulas. So you can click on that tab and you can find all the doulas in St. Louis and some in Kansas City. And then the contact information is there.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned
Yes.
that. Well, if there's
Yes.
somebody who is interested in doing what you do, what are the qualifications and how do they get started?
Okay. If there is someone who is interested even slightly in being an end-of-life doula, they need to contact me.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because I've been around for a while, number one. I am on the National End of Life Doula Alliance board, so it's international too. And so I can show them where to, I would definitely have a conversation with them first and then send them places to do some research.
Right.
And they can contact me at Joan at ACE end of life doula.com.
All right. And I'll make sure I put that link that for our listeners as well. So maybe they can click on it and maybe learn more about it. But I knew this was going to be an interesting conversation, Joan. It's something I'd really never heard about since recently, and you've enlightened me amazingly. And I
Oh,
believe you've
good.
done that with a lot of people too. So, you know, I will say personally, I'm not a fan of the whole inevitability of what's going to happen to all of us, but it's people like you that will, make it a little more tolerable and understandable. And I know that's probably your goal.
Right, right. And it's all of it really has to do with the planning of it. So, and doing your advanced care planning, your advanced directive, that is so important. That is so, so important. So an advanced directive is the same thing if you go to an attorney as a living will.
Right.
But you don't have to go to an attorney to do your living will. Now, your will, your finances, yes, you have to go to an attorney.
Mhm.
But for your healthcare directive, which is an advanced directive, you do not have to see an attorney. There are several end-of-life doulas on a national level that do advanced care planning. And I personally, that's one of the main things of the services I provide is advanced care planning. Because I feel that if you really, and I know for some, if you're 18 or older, you need an advanced directive. You can go back to the Terry Schiavo case back in the 70s and read about that and how it all came about with advanced directives and stuff. And then there was a gal from
That was the young lady who was kept alive in a vegetative state literally for years.
Yes, 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 yes. There were 3 cases around the same time. And that is why advanced directives are here today. So it's really important for so many reasons to have an advanced directive.
Well,
And
yes, go ahead.
I was going to say there's the NHDD, National Healthcare Decisions Day is in April. And that's when we really push for people to have their directives, at least have the conversation.
Yes.
The most important thing is having the conversation. So do you know what your husband would want if he comes down with a terminal illness?
Yes, we've discussed it.
Okay,
And vice versa. Yes.
that is so important, those conversations. Putting them down on paper is important, but having the conversations are so important. And it's about what you want. It's not about what your loved ones want for you.
Right.
completing your
right.
healthcare directive. It's about, you fill it out for you and for currently. And then, of course, you update them.
Just as
It
you would a
takes-
will. Right.
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
well, this has been fascinating. Joan Bretthauer, a certified end-of-life doula and also a member of the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, based here in St. Louis. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you enlightening me as well as our listeners about what you do, why you do, and how you help people. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Randy.
All right. And
Bye-bye.
again, thanks for joining us on More to Say. If you wouldn't mind, like, subscribe, share, and all that good stuff. We are available everywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks for joining us.
This has been More to Say with Randy Naughton. Interesting conversations with interesting people. Be sure to like or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.